The day is over. Whatever it held, it's behind you now. Tonight's story isn't just for sleep. It's for softness, for slowing down. Subscribe if you'd like more gentle moments like this one. And let me know, when do you usually listen to these stories? I didn't go into the shop looking for a clock. I went in because it was raining and my hands were cold, and the woman behind the counter looked like the kind of person who wouldn't mind if I wandered around without buying anything. The place smelled of wax paper and old linen. You know the scent, the kind that reminds you of drawers you weren't supposed to open as a child. The shelves were cluttered but careful, every object resting like it had earned the right to stay exactly where it was. Then I saw it, the clock. It wasn't large, just a small round wall clock with a walnut frame and faded gold hands. No numbers, just 12 delicate notches and a silence that pulled at me. It was hanging slightly crooked, its minute hand trembling ever so slightly, like it had something it wanted to say, but wasn't sure if it was allowed. I stood in front of it for too long, hands in my coat pockets, listening without knowing why. The woman behind the counter finally said, "It's been there for years. Doesn't keep proper time." I nodded. That didn't bother me. I wasn't buying it to tell the hour. I was buying it because something about it felt unsettled. Or maybe because I was. I paid in cash. She wrapped it carefully, like she was tucking in something fragile that might startle if handled roughly. I took it home, placed it on the wall above my desk. It didn't tick. It hummed softly, just enough to remind me it was there. That first night, it rang at 10:46. A single chime. I looked up, confused. There were no chimes on this clock, no mechanism for sound. But I heard it. I was sure I did. I checked my phone. Nothing. No messages. No news. No explanation. I went to bed thinking maybe it was in my head or some echo from outside. But the next morning, I got a call. My friend Clara, her father, had died. Peacefully, she said, in his sleep. Around 10:45, 10:46. She wasn't sure. I didn't say anything, just listened, offered what comfort I could. But when I hung up, I turned slowly toward the clock. It was still, quiet. The hands hadn't moved. I whispered, "What did you just tell me?" The clock didn't answer, but I already knew this wasn't about timekeeping. It was about something else entirely. A few days passed. I didn't expect it to ring again. Or maybe I did, in that quiet part of the mind where we store the thoughts we're not ready to speak aloud. I kept glancing at it, not obsessively, just often enough for it to become part of the way I moved through my space, like checking if a shadow had shifted slightly while your back was turned. The second chime came in the early evening, 7:23, exactly. I had just made tea. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk. The cup was still steaming when the sound came soft, delicate, like a tuning fork that had only just remembered what it was for. 1 note. That was all. I froze, looked up. The hands of the clock hadn't moved. 7:23. Again. No visible mechanism for chimes. No wires. No hidden device. I checked the windows, the hallway. Nothing. Just the sound, still lingering in the walls. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not from fear, more from restlessness. Like a thought I hadn't quite finished was pacing inside my chest. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a message I hadn't expected. My sister. We hadn't spoken in months, not out of malice, just distance. She wrote simply, "I had a strange dream about you last night. You were sitting by a window holding tea. You looked calm, like you'd finally stopped waiting for something." I stared at the message for a long time, looked at my own cup, still half full beside the keyboard. I didn't respond right away. There was nothing to explain. But something about it aligned. Not in time, in tone, in meaning. I looked up at the clock again. Still, still, still silent. I whispered, "So it's not just about endings." The clock said nothing, but I swear I felt the air shift as if the room exhaled, or maybe it was me. Either way, I was starting to understand this wasn't a countdown. It was a language. One I didn't know yet, but one I was slowly beginning to listen to. It happened at 3:06 in the morning. A single soft chime that slipped through the quiet like a thread being pulled through heavy cloth. I was already half awake, not from a dream, but from a weight I couldn't name. I sat up, blinking into the dim room, lit only by the faint blue glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. The clock's hands hadn't moved. Of course they hadn't. Still frozen in their peculiar, indifferent pose. But I knew the sound had come from it. Not because I heard it, but because I felt it. Like how you know when someone has entered the room even if you're looking the other way. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. The room wasn't dark in the frightening sense. It was soft. Like the world had drawn a curtain around me and said, "Now listen." I swung my legs out of bed and sat for a moment, my feet touching the cold floor, my palms resting on my thighs. The chime echoed in me. Not in my ears, but somewhere behind the sternum, like an after-image you see not with your eyes, but with something older. I didn't check my phone, didn't search for bad news. I just sat there, still, until the sensation faded, and yet something had shifted. I felt it in the way the silence settled differently afterward. Heavier, but not oppressive, like it was holding something for me. I got up, not knowing why, and walked to the bookshelf in the corner. I ran my fingers over the spines as if something would rise up to meet me. My hand paused on a journal I hadn't touched in years, not since before she left. I pulled it out, sat down at the desk. The clock loomed above me, unmoving but undeniably present. I opened the journal to the middle, and there it was. A page I'd half written, years ago, then abandoned. Just a few lines, but enough to take the air from the room. I don't know how to miss you without pretending I don't. I closed the journal slowly, placed it beside me, and then I whispered not to the clock, not even to her, to myself, "Okay, I'm listening." And somewhere in the stillness, I swear something listened back. I hadn't planned to leave the apartment that day, but something about the morning light made staying inside feel dishonest. The air smelled like late autumn, that dry, metallic crispness that makes you think of fireplaces and pages turning. I put on my coat and left the building without a destination. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But my steps knew better. They carried me through quieter streets, ones I didn't usually take. And without really meaning to, I found myself in front of the old shop where I'd found the clock. The door was locked. A sign in the window read, "Closed for personal reasons." I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to feel surprised or not. Then I cupped my hands against the glass and peered in. The inside looked different. Not just empty or rearranged, as if someone had gone through everything in a hurry and taken only what mattered, or what made sense. The spot where the clock had hung was bare, just a faint outline on the wallpaper, like a memory in dust. I stepped back, looked up. A small brass plaque I hadn't noticed before sat above the doorframe. It read, "Time isn't broken, just misunderstood." I don't know why, but I smiled. Not because I understood it, I didn't, but because it felt like something that would only appear when you were ready to read it. I wandered the streets a bit more after that, passing cafes and bookshops and old men walking dogs in coats too small for them. Nothing unusual happened. No one called, nothing rang, but the world felt fuller somehow, more layered. Like if I listened closely, I might hear other clocks, not ticking but breathing. I went home just before sunset, made tea and sat under the clock. I watched its unmoving hands as the steam curled from my cup. "You're not really about time, are you?" I asked. And for the first time, I didn't expect an answer. Because maybe it had been answering all along, just in a language that didn't speak in hours and minutes, but in memory and meaning, and moments you only understand once they've already happened. That night, I dreamed of my childhood bedroom. Not the whole thing, just a corner, the far left, near the radiator where the wallpaper always curled slightly from the heat. In the dream, the room was empty except for a bed and a small desk, and above it, hanging on the wall, was a clock. It was the same one. Same walnut frame, same soft golden hands. But the minute hand was moving. Slowly, purposefully, I woke up with that image still in my chest. It wasn't the kind of dream you shake off with coffee. It lingered. I sat at the kitchen table long after the toast had gone cold. Then I pulled out an old photo album from the shelf in the hall. One of those thick, leather-bound ones with clear plastic sleeves that crinkle when you turn the pages. I flipped slowly, each image a small window into a time I didn't always want to remember. And then I found it, a birthday party. 7, maybe 8 years old, balloons, cake, wrapping paper scattered like fallen leaves. And there, almost unnoticed in the background of one photo, above the fireplace, the clock. The same clock. My hand shook just slightly as I touched the photo. The idea of coincidence felt far too small to hold what I was feeling. I called my mother. "Do you remember the clock we used to have in the old house?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "The one that chimed?" she asked. "Yes, that one." Another pause, then softly. "We got rid of it after your grandfather died. You were too young to understand, but it rang the night he passed." I remember. We thought it was broken. It never worked again after that. I thanked her, hung up, sat in the quiet for a long time. The clock above my desk still didn't tick, still didn't move, but I looked at it differently now. Not as an object I had found, but as something that had found me. Again, And maybe, not for the first time, I whispered, "You remember, don't you?" It didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Some things come back to us, not to be solved, but to be held. I don't know what made me open the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet that night. It wasn't a conscious thought, just a passing urge. The kind that shows up when you walk past something you've ignored for too long. I pulled it open and was greeted by the familiar scent of old cardboard and dust. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years, mismatched gloves, brittle receipts, a broken flashlight. And under it all, a small square box wrapped in wax paper. I froze. My hand hovered for a moment before I reached in and gently lifted it out. It was heavier than I remembered. I sat down on the floor, legs crossed like a child again, and carefully unfolded the paper. Inside was a clock, not like the one on the wall, now smaller, plastic, the kind you'd find in a child's bedroom. Blue, with tiny planets and stars on the face. The hands were bent, the battery compartment rusted, but I remembered it. This was my first clock, a birthday gift from my mother when I turned 7. I'd forgotten the details, but holding it now, something clicked. Not a memory exactly, more like an alignment. As if the weight of this old thing finally made space in me for something I hadn't known was missing. I remembered how it used to beep at odd times, not on the hour, not on schedule. It would just go off, softly, once. And I'd run to check it, only to find it hadn't moved. I asked my mother about it once, and she'd said, "Maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's just trying to get your attention." I'd laughed at the time, but now, all these years later, I stared at this little blue clock and then looked up at the one on the wall. They were different in form, but something about them felt related, or connected, or trying to tell the same story in different voices. I placed the old one gently on the shelf beneath the wall clock. Let them sit together. Maybe they had things to say to each other that I wasn't meant to understand. Or maybe I was, just not yet. I didn't need all the answers. I just needed to keep listening, because sometimes the signal doesn't make sense until the echo comes back. That evening, the sky dimmed early. Heavy clouds had settled like thick thoughts above the city, and my apartment felt more like a small cabin tucked inside a dream than a place with walls and bills and reliable plumbing. I had lit a candle, not for light, but because I liked how it flickered, how it reminded me that stillness could dance. I was reading, or at least pretending to, when the chime came again. Not loud, just clear, and different this time. It wasn't alone. 2 notes, not one. A soft pair of sounds, like someone saying, "I'm here." I didn't flinch. I didn't move right away. I just let them settle in the air. My mind didn't jump to tragedy. It didn't race towards someone I might have lost. It did something stranger. It wandered inward, to a memory I hadn't visited in decades. I was 8, sitting on the living room floor, my back against the couch, a wooden clock ticking behind me. It had belonged to my grandfather. I remember how it would chime, not perfectly, not on the hour, just when it wanted. I once asked him why. He said, "It rings when it remembers something." That memory came back so vividly I could feel the carpet under my fingers again. And then I realized something. This clock, the one I bought, the one that had been ringing at the wrong times. It looked just like his, almost identical. The same warmth in the grain, the same weight in its stillness. I stood slowly, looked up at it, and for a second, just one, I swore the hands moved. Not far, not even noticeably, just enough to tell me, "You've arrived where you needed to." I didn't understand it all. I didn't need to, but I felt it. This clock hadn't come into my life by chance. It had returned. Or I had, to a moment I never quite finished, to a question I never knew I'd asked. That night, I took the clock gently from the wall, carried it to the floor, sat with it in my lap like a fragile animal, and whispered, "I remember too." It didn't chime that day, or the next, not once. I kept glancing up at it, not because I was waiting, but because I was noticing. That's what had changed, I think. The waiting had become watching. The watching had become listening, and the listening had become remembering. I sat beneath it that evening, tea untouched, journal open but blank. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, the kind that hold back rain like a breath not yet released. I thought about every moment the clock had chosen to speak. It had never warned me, never tried to change anything, just acknowledged, a quiet companion to what already was. I stood, finally, and removed it from the wall. It was lighter than I remembered, almost empty. I turned it in my hands. There, on the back, faint and half-faded beneath the wooden grain, were 3 initials carved in delicate script. I didn't recognize them. Or maybe I did. In that unspoken way you recognize something before your mind catches up. I traced them with my finger, then placed the clock gently on the desk. I didn't hang it back up. It had said what it came to say. Now it could rest. I lit a small candle and sat beside it. No more questions. No need to understand everything. The world, I realized, didn't owe me clarity. It only asked that I notice when something mattered, and maybe, once in a while, that I let it change me. Outside, the first drop of rain tapped the window, then another, then many. I closed the journal and said nothing aloud, but the silence inside me for the first time in a long while felt full, like something had settled, not ended, just found its place. The clock remained still, and that too was a kind of music.